Pahokee, Florida is where we are for this video. The city lies right along the southeastern shores of the almighty Lake Okeechobee. From here, it's about a 45-minute drive east to get to West Palm Beach, and about a 15-minute drive south to get to Pahokee's sibling of Belle Glade. Pahokee is the third and final city of the three cities of the Glades that I filmed while I was down here, and life in Pahokee is much like what life is like in both Belle Glade and South Bay. With that said, we start the video entering Pahokee from the south, and from here I'll drive around over towards the high school before heading through downtown. After that, I'll then head east of town along Muck City Road, as once you get out there a few miles, there's an entire pedophile community, and I'll talk about that once we get there. Quick note on that, as prisons, correctional facilities, and other related places, such as Miracle Village, which is the name of said community, have always been big contributors to the economy for the cities in the Glades region. Belle Glade used to have a prison drug farm for a while before being closed in 2006. Belle Glade also had a large correctional facility, but that closed in 2011. South Bay still has its correctional facility, however, employing hundreds of workers. But that's enough of the prison talk for now, as we'll have more time to talk about all of that stuff later in the video. For now, let's talk about the history of the place, shall we? Pahokee was founded in 1909, with the name coming from the Seminole word of Pahokee, which means grassy waters, referencing the Everglades, of course. The city was incorporated officially in 1922. Pahokee is often referred to as Muck City, or the Muck, just like the neighboring city of Belle Glade is to the south. Now, Belle Glade is referred to that more often because it's the larger of the two cities, but in all reality, both Pahokee and Belle Glade are called the Muck. The name comes from the dark layer of soil that covers the area, which came from the floodwaters of Lake Okeechobee before the canal, levee, and dike systems were built. As I explained in my video on Belle Glade, the Everglades used to extend as far north as Lake Okeechobee, as the Everglades is technically a slow-moving river of grass that, naturally, once carried water from the second largest freshwater lake entirely in the U.S. to the southern tip of Florida. That is, until mankind built the canals to drain the land, followed by the levee and dike systems being built years later. I sped things up because we're passing by a whole lot of nothing, but now we're passing by Pahokee High School, home of the Blue Devils. And just like with Glade Central High School in Belle Glade, Pahokee is known for having a strong football program. It's about the most positive thing you can say about the town, as football has sent dozens of young men from Pahokee to college on scholarships, where they would otherwise likely not get a college education due to not being able to afford it, as Pahokee sees an extremely high amount of poverty. Well, anyway, Pahokee and Glade Central High School have a fierce rivalry and play in what they call the Muck Bowl every year. Among the most notable alumni of Pahokee includes potential NFL Hall of Fame wide receiver Anquan Bolden, Hall of Fame linebacker Ricky Jackson, cornerback Janoris Jenkins, former outside linebacker Pernell McPhee, and former safety Andre Waters. The list goes on, but those are some of the more notable names. Up ahead, there's going to be a few more things to point out, and in between it all, I'll continue to talk about other things with the history of Pahokee. Anyway, it shares the same history with Belle Glade, generally speaking, with thousands of migrant workers flocking to the area every season since the communities began their existence. Pahokee has always been a poverty-stricken rural town with no economy to speak of outside of agriculture. In 2022, there was actually a documentary released on PBS called Out of the Muck, based on what life is like for the typical Pahokee resident. As I understand it, the documentary focuses on the poverty aspect of the community. In 1963, there was a sugar plant that was built in town as the Glades region continued to produce more sugarcane than anywhere else in the United States. However, it closed in 2009 after running for 45 seasons. Today, there's one in Belle Glade and another several miles east of Pahokee. Even with those, however, the closure of the old plant in town eliminated many jobs, as U.S. Sugar Corporation had no other choice than to modernize their facilities, or so they say. With that came the cost of the original Pahokee plant. Some were able to keep their jobs and work at a more modern facility, however, 30 miles away. Well, up ahead on the left is the original Pahokee High School. This building was built in 1928 before the historic hurricane came through and wiped out most of the town the same year. The old Pahokee High School was one of the few buildings that was able to survive that storm. In fact, it's the oldest standing building in Pahokee, maybe even out of the entire Glades region. This school was once the only high school for all of the communities in the Glades region, including Belle Glade, South Bay, and even Clewiston, which is about a half-hour drive west of here. Things were that way until Belle Glade built their high school in 1941. The school building was put on the National Register of Historic Places in 1996, and in 1998, the new high school was opened. Right across the street from the old high school is the old Prince Theater, which looks like it's in pretty bad shape today. It would be impossible to know what this was when just standing there and looking at it, as there isn't an outline of any words up top or anything. The theater opened in 1931 and closed up shop sometime in the mid-1960s, so it was really short-lived, as it was only in operation for about 30 years or so. The city has had ownership of the theater since 1976, and it actually reopened in 1980, but was only able to stay open for a few years before closing again. Now, out of the three cities in the Glades area, the three cities being Belle Glade, South Bay, and Pahokee, Pahokee is actually the one that has lost the most people over the years, losing about 1,500 since 1990. Now, some of you might not think that that's a lot, but the town's population was only 6,800, so that's a pretty big chunk of the population that's no longer here. And common sense says that when you have a high percentage of a peak population for a town leave, then you're going to see a lot of abandoned buildings. Now, most of the buildings in Pahokee aren't abandoned necessarily, but a lot of them are really sad looking. Well, with that said, we're going to transition to talking about the economic stats for the town. Today, as I mentioned, Pahokee is home to about 5,500 people, and the median household income is only $30,000 per year. And it's been a long time since I've seen a community with that low of a number, and I've been to a lot of places, obviously. Only 16% of adults 25 and older hold a bachelor's degree or higher, and the median value of owner-occupied housing units is $97,000, while the poverty rate is 35%. Now on to the crime stats, and Pahokee is not doing so well there. The violent crime rate is nearly 900 for every 100,000 residents, while the property crime rate is 2,700 for every 100,000 residents. When you do a search for Pahokee, you come across a bunch of crime stories such as man tracked to Orlando to face charges in Pahokee fatal shooting, 3 men arrested after fatal shooting in Palm Beach County, with the mugshot of a dude with face tats, 1 man killed, 1 injured in early morning shooting. You know, these are headlines that we've grown accustomed to hearing out of the big cities, sadly, but not necessarily in small town America, so it's a shame that it happens so often anywhere in this country really, but let alone here in the small rural town of Pahokee. If you've seen my other videos on the cities in the Glades region, being South Bay and Belle Glade, then you'll know that both of those cities see high rates of violent crime too. Well, moving on now with other things to mention about Pahokee, which is that the state of Florida has considered the city of Pahokee to be under what the state calls a state of financial emergency. Pahokee has been on this list continuously since 1994, putting it on the list for a longer run than any other city in the state of Florida. Currently, Pahokee is one of 9 cities on the list in Florida as of 2023. Usually when a city is declared as being in such a place financially, or possibly even on the verge of bankruptcy, there's usually some corruption involved. And after doing a search for that, I found a story from 2021 where there was a number of city employees that were fired unexpectedly. Apparently there was a bunch of drama during a city meeting that year, but the firing had citizens confused and demanding answers. Some are saying that it seemed kind of sketchy, like that firing some of the city employees was a cover-up for dirty laundry that the city didn't want to be public or something like that. But this other article from January of 2022 states that Mayor Keith Babb and City Attorney Gary Brandenburg have been yelling at each other in meetings, and watching it is like seeing an episode of The Jerry Springer Show. Rest in peace, Jerry Springer. There's also a YouTube video where it starts with the mayor being accused of election fraud, and it only gets heated from there. At least it's nothing like what we saw back in 2012 when then newly elected Pahokee Vice Mayor Felicia Hill faced 11 counts of grand theft, 6 counts of petite theft, and 1 count each of tampering with a witness and organized scheme to defraud. MTV could totally set up a reality TV show in the Glades region with all of this drama. Well, here you can see some of the slums that city residents call home. We saw some not so good looking mobile homes a second ago as well. I'm not saying that every Pahokee resident lives in conditions that mimic a dumpster, but I am saying that over 30% of the town is in poverty, and it's very likely that many of the homes here and apartments are in disrepair. It's also likely that there's a good handful of people here who can't afford air conditioning. We saw the same type of thing in the other nearby towns of Belle Glade and South Bay in my other videos. Well, for the next several minutes, we're going to continue seeing parts of Pahokee while we make our way towards the pedophile community called Miracle Village that's several miles east of town in the middle of sugarcane fields. And I'll talk more about it once we get there. So we have now reached the small community that is Miracle Village. The population of this little neighborhood is 80% made up of registered sex offenders and pedophiles. About 150 people live here in these tiny homes. Back in the day, these homes were built for migrant workers by the sugar companies, but today it supports a different population. Sex offenders in the state of Florida have a curfew of 10 p.m. However, curfew for Miracle Village residents is 7 p.m. Many of the residents here have GPS-monitored ankle bracelets 24/7. They're also subject to random drug tests, with some of them not even being allowed to access the internet, which means that they can't have a smartphone. Technically, the name of the community today is Restoration Destination. However, many people refer to it by the original name of Miracle Village. The community began in 2009 as a nonprofit when a local pastor had a vision to help recent offenders. But yeah, this is it. Miracle Village, off of Muck City Road, 3 miles east of Pahokee. Alright, well with that said, we now turn around and head back to town. We'll drive around for a few more minutes before ending the video with Chris's livability score, so make sure to stay tuned for that. Well, I've got to say, it is now that time, people. You can't always trust the people working for the city of Pahokee, and you can't always trust what's lurking in Lake Okeechobee. But you can always trust Chris's livability score. When it comes to the education, about 94% of the students at Pahokee High School are on the free lunch program. Another 4% have reduced lunches. The math, reading, and science scores aren't the best, but they're also not terrible. Pahokee High School largely mimics the academic and athletic performance of the nearby Glade Central High School. It gets a 7 out of 20. Crime is the next category, and crime in town is very concerning. It's been a long time issue here, and it hasn't really seemed to have gotten much better. I'm not saying that everyone here is a criminal, but you shouldn't be seeing headline after headline of a shooting in a small rural town of only 5,500 when you do a Google search. It gets a 3 out of 20. Downtown is the next category, and it doesn't have much shine to it. It looks very depressed, and many of the buildings seem to be falling apart. Also, the most historical buildings in downtown Pahokee are just kind of sitting there abandoned and rotting away. There also isn't much business. It gets a 2 out of 20. The economy of Pahokee is terrible. There are no high-paying jobs in town at all. You have to drive 15 minutes south to get to anything of note in Belle Glade, and that town basically has nothing either, so the economy gets a big, fat 0 out of 20. Recreational opportunities are a lone bright spot in Pahokee, with Lake Okeechobee being nearby, so you can get out on a boat and fish if you'd like. Plus, there's a 110-mile pedestrian trail that circles the lake, and I think that's awesome, even though I personally would probably never try it. In the hot and humid South Florida weather, it gets a 10 out of 20. Now, there's a decent amount of history in Pahokee. I thought that the story of the old high school was interesting, and it even has an old theater building in downtown. And that tells me that this town used to be at least somewhat better than it is today. History gets an 11 out of 20 for being a small town. Next up is amenities, and there are pretty much no amenities in town, generally speaking, outside of the Dollar General, a few grocery stores and gas stations, and it's pretty sad that it's that way. It gets a 1 out of 20. Lastly, the cost of living isn't an issue here at all, so that gets a glowing 20 out of 20. All in all, the Chris livability score for Pahokee, Florida is 54 out of 160, putting it right in the middle of the other Glades region cities of Belle Glade and South Bay, as all three make up the worst cities that I've given a Chris livability score to so far. The tough reality for the town is that Pahokee is a sad place. It's very much like the neighboring cities of Belle Glade and South Bay. Have I said that enough in this video? The poverty rate here is out of this world, and for it being an isolated rural town, there aren't really any resources available for the town to try to build a better future and build up some positive momentum. It's really tough to see this place being any better decades from now, as all of the growth activity in Florida stays on either the Gulf or Atlantic coasts. Well, with that said, I do end the video here. And do me a favor, as if you enjoy watching this type of video, make sure to drop a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, as doing all of those things helps these videos destroy the evil monster that is the YouTube algorithm. Also make sure to hit that notification bell and select yes, so that you can be notified every time that I upload a new video. If you enjoy this video, then you might enjoy checking out some of the featured playlists on this channel. Videos with amazing insights on other places like what you saw here can be found in my Florida playlist, my USA Small Towns playlist, or in my Palm Beach County playlist. Last but not least, if you can't get enough of me on here, you can always go follow me on my other social media accounts, and those links are below. We'll see you next time. Peace.